We're now joined by strategy consultant Dipo Oyewole to help us make sense of this development. Hello, Dipo. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Now, Dipo, seeking an additional 1.77 trillion naira in external borrowing, despite the ongoing economic challenges in Nigeria, how would you react to this?
Well, borrowing isn't a new thing. Almost, if not every nation of the world does it. However, where the challenge is where it's not adequately deployed into the improvement of the lives of the citizens. Now, people haven't had any issue with any borrowing. I mean, in our personal life, people are even advised that you don't borrow for consumption. You borrow to invest. You borrow to expand your business. You don't borrow to buy clothes. You don't borrow to buy phones and all of that. So it's a basic principle. So there's nothing wrong with borrowing. There's nothing wrong with debt. Debt is a basic financial tool that individuals use, that organizations use, and that nations use as well. However, how it is deployed is where a lot of people and a lot of nations have particular challenges, which is where we have issues with Nigeria and our history of borrowing. Because in time past, we've had a lot of borrowings done, and a lot of Nigerians will tell you that we haven't seen the actual impact of all this money that have been borrowed to be deployed adequately. And I saw a breakdown that you have on the screen there, where it's saying the loan for power is $750 million. So after we're saying that we're borrowing $750 million for power, can we then have adequate benchmarks to say that after we're able to inject $750 million into power, this is what we'll be generating, this is what Nigerians should expect in terms of power generation and access to possibly uninterrupted electricity? We must be able to have these conversations and have it adequately, because if we're not able to adequately peg these borrowings against any clear metric, we just find that we borrow the money, they say they deployed it, and then we don't see any impact of it, which is where Nigerians have a particular problem with the government borrowing. So the place of adequate communication and effective communication in terms of the government with this regard will be for them to adequately let us know that these are the metrics we're looking at. $750 million for power. This is where we are right now for power generation. This is where we want to be, and this is where we are expected to be after injecting $750 million. I mean, basic thing that we do in business, where people get to raise funds, they say they have a Series A, Series B, and you are able to tell investors adequately that, okay, you know what, we have 1 million users, we have 20 people on the team, we need to have access to funding of, let's say, $5 million. This will give us access to 5 million more subscribers, and we'll expand our team from 20 people to 30 people. So these are basic metrics that the Nigerian people need to know. We are borrowing $750 million to inject into the power sector out of the $2.2 billion. This is where we are. This is where to get us to.
All right. Now, how does the new external borrowing request align with Nigeria's current debt profile, and what exactly are the potential implications for the country's long-term fiscal sustainability?
Well, it's not much of a challenge if we're able to adequately prove that we can generate the revenue in multiples and see how we can pay back those loans as expected. Because the problem with debt, I mean, a lot of people will tell you that personally they don't borrow people. And the problem with that is because a lot of people have no intention of paying back, because some people don't even have the wherewithal to be able to pay back those loans. So as a nation, do we have adequate systems in place? Do we have plans in place on how to pay back these loans? That's for the government to answer, okay? But I'm hoping that we have adequate plans to generate revenue internally to be able to service these loans, and not just saying that we're just racking up debt for generations to come. But in terms of our debt profile, of course, it's sort of ever increasing, and we'd like to see it go down drastically, but that will also not happen magically. Revenue. Revenue is the name of the game. Revenue is the word that we need to pay attention to. We must see how to adequately generate enough revenue to pay back these loans as a when due.
Now, how will the proposed borrowing impact Nigeria's foreign exchange reserves and the relationship that the country has with international creditors and financial institutions?
Well, with regards to the relationship we have with our creditors and international organizations, again, I'll refer back to the private sector. So there's nothing wrong with borrowing. Again, I'll say that. But where you have good standing is where you have a history of paying back and paying back as a Wendy. So if we're able to prove that we can be good debtors, if I can use that word, a lot of folks who are in the international community, our creditors will be more receptive to either potential requests to come, or even when we then need to ask for certain allowances or extensions, they'll be open and willing to give it to us. So it's mostly around us being able to prove and show that we're able to pay back those loans and pay them back adequately as a Wendy.
All right. Given that the Senate has been asked to review the borrowing request within 24 hours now, do you think the lawmakers will have enough time to conduct a thorough analysis and to consider the long-term implications of this borrowing?
Well, I believe we may be a bit pressed for time, but 24 hours is a very short period. This is something that I would prefer that they deliberate on, and they deliberate on it extensively, and we don't just gloss over it, because we can't just say that we're just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. I mean, this is, I talk about being able to adequately define the metrics for the terms of the borrowing. Now, these are things that we expect the National Assembly to be able to ask us questions and to have as conversation with the federal government, saying that, so you're saying you want to borrow X amount into this particular part of the economy or into this part of our daily life. What does it get us? And we're able to adequately peg those metrics down and say we're going to hold this to account if you do not meet these particular metrics. If we're saying we're pumping $750 million into power and we're supposed to get a particular megawatt, it will happen over what period of time? Because we don't want to go back to the time where we invested, or I would say wasted, allegedly $16 billion into the power sector and nothing came of it. We cannot afford it right now. We don't want to go back to those days. We need better management of our resources, either it's internally generated or it's borrowed externally.
All right. Thank you so much, strategy consultant Dipo Oyewole, for joining us and sharing your thoughts on that.
Thank you for having me.